Welcome to this week's Master Coaches Wednesday Weekly Buzz hosted by John Foreman. We continue to update our viewers on the most current issues in collegiate volleyball and junior club volleyball and trends with the new women's professional volleyball leagues and conversations with leaders in our sport. Most recently, our guest was Lindsay Atkinson, Director of Sports at the National Federation of State High School Associations, who gave us an update on what high school volleyball might look like this fall. Now, let's go to former Olympic coach Mick Haley, who will introduce our first Journey of the Legends series special guest today. Mick.
So I'm pretty excited about introducing this young man. He and I have done battle for some time, but before I do, a couple of things hot on the wire that I want to throw out to see if anybody has heard anything about. This morning, real early, there was a tweet by a former national championship coach that said he had been talking to several coaches in a Power 5 conference that were seriously thinking that their conference was going to discontinue all fall sports. That would be a big deal if anybody knows anything about that. And then just a little bit ago, I received a text from another coach that says Stanford has just released a statement saying they will drop 11 sports at the end of this year, one of them being men's volleyball, and that would be a very big problem for men's volleyball. We've had Wade Gerard on from First Point, as well as John Spraw from our national men's team, who's co-founder of First Point Volleyball Foundation. So have any of you heard anything more about any of that?
Well, I just read the same thing, Mick, and it said 11 programs consist of 240 incredible student athletes and 22 dedicated coaches. Wow, that's...
So this might just be the first shoe of what's going to start happening. So everybody needs to stay tuned to that. So if nobody else has heard anything, then I want to go on with our roasting. I'm sorry, not roasting. I'm sorry, Brian. We were talking. It's really my...
As we're sitting here, I just got a response from about the Stanford situation because they identified financial considerations being a problem, and I just got a text saying Stanford has $28 billion in their endowment. So I don't know how that could be a financial issue for a sport like men's volleyball. I also got another text just now that AIC, American International, up in Massachusetts, is going to add men's volleyball this year. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think they're up to 13 or 14 schools now are committed to adding men's volleyball in Division II or Division III. Is that a Division I program, Bob, or is that Division II?
No, it's a Division II program, and of course it doesn't substitute for a loss of a program like Stanford, of course. But at least it shows the growth, of the sport. And seems like Stanford's administration is missing that point.
Well, more on these topics later. Right now, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Brian Gimmillaro, one of the all-time great collegiate women's coaches of all time. Brian really has taken Long Beach State to the pinnacle as far as volleyball is concerned, and maybe as an athletic department. They've had some great history at that school, but women's volleyball and men's volleyball have seemingly risen to the top, and Brian was primarily responsible for two of those programs, the sand program as well as the indoor program. But Brian, you've come out of nowhere and kind of established a level that's difficult for anybody to step up and match, and you did that through a number of years of hard work, and it's really quite interesting to be able to probe a little bit about how you were able to do this and what drove you. We have a series of questions that we've kind of developed as a group. Some of them will be a little fun. Some of them will try to catch you off guard a little bit. Some of them I think our listeners would really like. this is some nice youthful pictures. I think that are quite nice. But Brian, can you tell us who really influenced you to get into coaching and to stay into coaching? Role models, mentors, influencers. Can you give us kind of a background on some of the stuff that happened to you, the people that were influential that helped you decide you wanted to try to do this?
Well, I think I was one of those young guys who liked to play sports that were for big people, but I played anyway. And I really liked sports when I was a kid, all sports. How I became a coach, I don't think I ever planned on becoming a coach. I think it happened. A friend of mine started a high school program, my best friend, and we ended up coaching together. It just started. It just happened. I had no intention and no plan of becoming a coach. In fact, I'm not sure in my whole life I would define myself as a typical coach, but I coached a lot. I wanted to say that we talk about college, but when we really talk about coaching, I coached high school, and we became the #1 team in the country, and I was proud of that. But high school, I owned a club for over 30 years and coached there. I coached international games. I coached summer. I coached off season. I know I coached over 2,000 matches. But to be specific over who influenced me, I think so many coaches and so many sports I followed, and I really, really like them.
Hall of Fame coach, Springfield College, Bob Bertucci, is on along with Ruth Nelson. Bob, did you have a question for Brian?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions. I guess one on, Brian, like you said, you've been coaching a long time, and we all have, and I'm interested to hear from you how you changed, when you first started coaching, all right, and the type of athlete you had and how you had to change over your career. Because I know that's been something that, I've kind of reflected back on a little bit.
Well, I think that I've never been a person who, I always tell players, and I think I was the same, I think you have a goal, and then you make your goal, and then you forget about it. And you don't forget it, you just put it to the side because it can become distracting. But I think that what I did as a coach was that I just closed the door to the gym and worked. I always wanted to feel as though you couldn't question. You might think that might be too hard, or you might think that I would, wanted something that wasn't there. But I wanted to always have integrity, so you couldn't question anything I did. So over time, how you present yourself might change, but your message never does, and what you're attempting to do never changes. It just stays the same. And this is becoming very serious, though. I'm a little concerned about it. I know this pretty well. I'm a little concerned about these questions. No, but I think that as you get older, people it's funny how people will look at you differently. Like some of those pictures, I don't recognize myself, but I think, we see ourselves the same. We just have to take into consideration how someone else might see us.
How about in terms of your approach to the athletes? Have you seen that change over time? You hear a lot of coaches talk about how athletes have changed.
Well, as a kid, playing sports, in my era playing sports, we, whatever the coach said, we did. And I think what I always wanted to do, and I thought it was important, was to explain to players why. Always why. Never ask them to do something that you couldn't defend, and show them that it would help their play. So how you work with players is simply explain to them how it would help them ask for their input and tell them if they have a better idea, you'd gladly do it. But over time, I think there's a lot more pressure on kids, and I call them kids, a lot more pressure on players than used to be. They have to be good right away. There's so many outside pressures for them to be good, and I think that's a disservice to them. So get them to close the doors and practice, and get them to enjoy the process is really, something that I always wanted to do.
Okay, I'm going to liven it up a bit. My turn.
Go ahead.
Okay, Brian, what is the funniest moment during your coaching career?
Can I answer that in two parts? One is the funniest, and one is the most embarrassing. The funniest, I remember my son, I used to do, we coached in the Pyramid. The Pyramid is a huge practice and game facility. It's huge. And we'd have maybe 300 or 400 balls going. And I used to bring my kids when they were little, and they'd shag the balls. And I remember when in practice, and we all have done this, I told my team, it's one of those points in practice that you don't like what's going on. And you decide to do this huge, I'm going to gather the team up and tell them this is unacceptable. And, that's the way, this can't happen this way. And the players are all lined up, and I'm giving them the speech and all that. And I'm looking at the players, and they always looked at me, and several of them are looking down and looking away. And I finally realized why. And that was that my son took one of the old carts, the ones with the long legs on them, and turned it upside down and was underneath the cart. He's probably 3 years old. And he was behind me sliding along the cart upside down, and all you saw was the cart moving behind me and nothing else. And suddenly players started laughing, and I didn't realize it. And I said, well, that lecture is over. Forget about it. We're going to go play again. But it's good that they felt comfortable enough to laugh at me making this speech. And then the most embarrassing thing was people didn't realize how crazy Misty May was. And, we were on an airplane coming back from Hawaii, and, when you fall asleep on the airplane and your mouth is wide open, and how attractive that is. Well, Misty took a picture of me with my mouth wide open. And so, and just before a match, you go into the, locker room with all these strategies, tactical strategies, and you list everything, and you're on the board, and I walk in and make my speech. And as I'm making my speech, everybody's looking down again. Nobody's looking at me. And I'm thinking, what's going on? And then I looked up, and on every locker above high on their lockers, was a picture of me with my mouth wide open on the Hawaiian flag. But that wasn't the most embarrassing. The most embarrassing is then we're in the Pyramid, that huge building, and all the way around the concourse level, Misty put about 200 pictures of me with my mouth wide open for the fans to see before the game. That was an interesting movie.
So, Brian, you're lucky that there wasn't social media, because you would be plastered everywhere.
Thank God for that. But that was one of 100 stories about Misty. She happened to get me that time.
So Brian, back to your time winning 3 national championships. You played some awfully good teams, but in conference, you had to play Hawaii home and away from time to time. I know from going to Honolulu and playing in the NCAA tournaments, I was there in '96 in the regional semifinals and finals, and again in 2000, I think in 11. You get that feeling that the whole island is absolutely willing the Wahine to win. What kind of relationship did you have with the Hawaii competition and with Coach Soji, and how did you handle those matches? I'm sure they were intense. A lot of 5-game thrillers, I think.
Oh yeah, I remember in 1989 and I'd like to talk about that, but we won the first championship in 1990 when we played Hawaii both times. And they had writers for Hawaii who were, written volleyball for 30 years. They really knew the game, and they called those two matches the best volleyball matches they had ever seen. I loved playing there. It was a love-hate relationship for the fans, but it was a lot of respect. And there were some great matches. I wish there was national television in those days. I remember a couple times when, there were several college players of the year on the different sides of the court. They ended up being Olympians, several All-Americans, and it was really a great battle. It was fun. I really enjoy it. I really enjoyed it. I've always liked the full gym, and I've always liked I had a weird thing about me, and that is for some reason, I enjoyed it. I enjoy games that are, 14-14 in the fifth. I like deuce games. I kind of, it doesn't scare me, and it excites me, and I've always really liked that. Not even sure why. But if I can say something about the 80-19, it was our first championship. I just saw, in fact, 2 days ago, somebody posted on Facebook a 3.5-minute version. It was from YouTube about the 89 team, and I narrated it, and I don't even remember narrating this highlight. I don't remember doing it, but it was what I was proud of is that in 1989 there had never been a national championship team with more than one black woman on the team. And we had 5 black women starters on the team, and we won that championship. And I didn't do it like to make some point. It just happened. It happened that way. And I remember when the 5th black woman became a starter on that team, and how much I learned from that, how much I learned about strength of character and working together and pride. And people said a lot about me for that, but I learned much more from them than they learned from me and from those women. And I really was proud of that, because we kind of, it did have some influence, I guess, but at least, nobody can take that away. That was a kind of a landmark team. So I wanted to say something about that.
Did you play ever in the small gym in Hawaii, not the Stan Sheriff Center?
I could call the Clum Gym. I could tell you stories about that. Clum Gym that are just, you would get the splinters from the floor from the termites, and you would get, there was one fan, there was no air conditioning, one fan that would circle around. So many stories I could tell you. I remember one end of the court was longer than the other, much longer, and they let the fans sit on the floor. And I remember Antoinette White, who became NCAA Player of the Year, would serve way deep, and she'd serve and then run through the fans on the floor to get to the court. And there were many more stories like that. There were some spectacular matches in there, but only Hawaii television got to see that.
Okay.
Ruth, go ahead. You have another one?
Well, I'll go too. I want to make sure. I have too many questions that I want to ask, and we're going to end up running out of time. All right. I've got a picture for you to look at. Hold on.
Okay.
What do you feel about this statement when you look at this picture? Coaches are in your life for a season, reason, or a lifetime.
They're in your life for a reason, season, all of it. I can't say enough about my experience with Ari Sellinger. I think he has the greatest mind, and he was the first coach that looked at the way the body works, and he intellectualized the game, intellectualized the movement, and he was an exercise physiologist. And I took what he was teaching, and it just allowed me to be free and do more. I can't say enough about your player, Ruth, Flo Hyman, who I got to not coach, but be the business manager of the her Olympic team. And and got to watch her and her poise and grace and dignity. And but there's several coaches and several players: Daniel Scott, Tara Cross, Antoinette White, Misty May. I could go through 100 players who influenced me. I like to think that I've never walked into a gym, any gym at every level, any level, that I didn't learn something when I was in that gym by watching a player. But most of the things I taught were from players that I coached. You know, I learned from them. I watched the way they moved, and I just stole their movement and taught it. What made sense to me, I would then teach. So what I teach is what I learned. And then there's several other coaches, professional coaches, that I find that are just spectacular, and what their knowledge was and what they say. And if we had time, I'd tell you about all of them. But
Thank you.
That's some of our
Hey, Bob,
and something about, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry, you were talking about being with Salinger, and that was like 74, Coda de Casa, about that time, right, in your lifetime?
Well, yeah.
79, 80. Yeah.
Oh,
It
yeah,
was
a little bit later.
83 and 84.
Yeah, I'm a decade off. Sorry about that. But there was something that players always wanted to know from you, and they never had enough courage, I think, to ask. Lori Corbelli is the one that shared this with me a long time ago. But you used to, and I actually used to do this also, but I was at Kellogg Community College, so nobody cared about this. But you used to walk in the gym to see Salinger, and you used to carry a briefcase. And the players could not figure out what you were bringing a briefcase to practice for all the time. And they always wanted to know. And that's a question that I don't think anybody's ever gotten answered. So what was the deal with the briefcase?
It's the first time anybody ever asked, too. Well, remember, I was the business manager, and Ari actually hired me because what people don't realize, and I call this the last amateur team in America. They had no money. And so I would have that in case Ari said, hey, what's going on with this? Which he might do at some time. You never do. And so my job was to bring in money to the team. So what was in there wasn't a bag of money, but it was a lot of contracts. It was a lot of contracts and a lot of wishing and hoping to help the players make it through the Olympics. And we did well. We did bring in some stuff.
Yeah. Oh, very good. Sorry, Bob, you probably had another question.
Yeah, I do have a story that I want to confirm. Now, and I honestly don't know why I haven't asked Brian this question before. But this story made it from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast. I don't know how it happened, but we all have plenty of recruiting stories. All right? Well, this recruiting story got to the East Coast somehow, and that's how I heard about it. I don't remember the particular athlete that was involved, but Brian, you got to tell me if it was true. And it was in the context of that Brian Gimmillaro. He's got to be one of the best recruiters in the country. You know, he was on the phone with a girl, and this athlete's cat died that morning, and he was crying on the phone with her to get her to sign. So I just want to know if this was true or not true.
I would not put that past me, but it was not true. I no. I remember some weird stories. I'll tell you that. I remember a player on the East Coast committed to us. We were very happy, and you remember, all of us remember that we didn't have any time for our families. And I remember going skiing with my family, and I called the recruit from my ski trip. I just gotten up there, and she decommitted and was talking about going to another school. And I remember my wife, that was the end of the ski trip. We drove up to Mammoth Mountain and drove back down to LAX, and I flew to the East Coast with ski clothing on to go to her home took the overnight flight and got there. So now, you know, Bob, on a serious vein, I was really disappointed when kids started to commit earlier, because what my favorite part about recruiting was going into their homes. You know, you always felt a little awkward going to someone's home, but you learned so much about the player. And I really loved going into the home. You're on their grounds. You know, you were there. And now I hope, you know, I know that now that I've retired, there's been some good changes about that, to be able to see kids younger. But I think that I really enjoyed that. And I think it gave us an opportunity to really, you know, spell out what we were going to do, what our plans were for that particular player. So I really missed that, but I didn't cry for a cat. I think I did for a dog one time. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, maybe it was a dog
I'm
instead of a cat.
Brian, you had success against almost every university that you played against over time. You won 3 NCAA National Championships, and yet when you look at the numbers, Stanford seemed to be a hard team to play against for your team. Has that bothered you at all, that they had a little bit more success against you than all the other teams, even with the 3 national championships, or is there a reason for that? Can you talk about that?
Does it bother me a little bit? Let me see. Every coach I know, no matter how much they win, are more upset about the losses than they like to win. Stanford beat us 4 times at the Final Four. And the times that I think that we were better, they weren't there. So yeah, we beat them once, but they beat us 4 times. Oh God, it was horrible. But the hardest loss ever, though, was actually against UCLA, where we thought at the championship, where we thought we won a championship, and I'm sure you know I shouldn't have said the name maybe, but I thought we won, and there was a call. It was on CBS in those days, and these days with a review call, I think we would have won the championship. We were a point away, but that call, it was a bad call, and CBS showed it a million times, and it never changed. But that was the hardest one. You never get over big losses. But you know, my daughter went to Stanford, and I told her she never could go to a volleyball game. You know, you know. No, but they were good, and they were. It was always a good match and a friendly match, and you know, in terms of competitive but friendly, and players liked each other, and you know, so it was good.
So you just caught them when they were at their best, huh?
Well, they were. There was one time we beat. The last time we were number 1, we beat. The Final Four was Nebraska, Arizona, Stanford, and us, and we beat all those. We beat them all. We beat Nebraska and Stanford during the regular season. We were undefeated going into the championship game, but I had a feeling we were a little in trouble because reporters were following the team all season. They were undefeated, and reporters were asking, "Is this the best team ever? Are you, you beat all the teams that are here. Can this team ever lose?" And asking 22, 21-year-old players that, I thought, wow, it was almost like a setup. And we lost the championship to Stanford. I think, I don't know if we were better, but certainly that day we weren't better.
Well, the fact that you were there, your team had a chance to compete for the national championship those times. Winning 3 is certainly outstanding, and having the opportunity to try to win more puts you right in the special spot with only a few other people. So it's been a real pleasure having you on today, and I'm now gearing up for when you get to ask me questions, because I know I feel like I'm going to get a couple of zingers too, and I have a couple of good stories I can relate also. So I think next week you guys are going to turn the tables and put me under the microscope, and that could be kind of interesting. So Brian, thanks so much for being open and volunteering so much information, and Our
Mick,
group is,
can I
ahead.
close with this?
Yeah,
Can I
please
just close?
do. Please do.
I retired, and all I do is a few clinics with you guys, master coaches, and I really appreciated getting. One of the things probably was a weakness in my career is that I really wasn't very sociable. I just worked and went home with my family, but I really got getting to know you, Mick, and Ruth and Bob. I knew you somewhat, but it was great to get to know you through this Master Coaches. I think the clinics are fun and they're very good, and so I appreciate that. And I enjoy staying involved in volleyball and doing a few television matches. I don't know if I'll do any this year, if there are any. But I like still being involved. But I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you guys, and I wanted to tell you that.
Well, thanks. And back to Ruth now to close here.
Okay, next week, Journey of the Legends series. Guest will be the coach who has won 10 national championships, inducted into 3 different Hall of Fame, and you know this former Olympic coach, Mick Haley. Mick, we cannot wait to ask you a few up-close and personal questions.
I'll bet you can.
Now, a special shout out to all those coaches that have attended one of our Championship Skills Series clinics. For those interested in hosting a Master Coaches virtual clinic this fall or an in-person clinic in 2021, contact us at www.volleyballmastercoaches.com. Watch our upcoming series, Journey of the Legends, that will continue featuring interviews with our Master Coaches, Mick, Bob, and Ruth. Join us next week for Master Coaches Weekly Buzz, and follow us on Facebook, Volleyball Master Coaches, Instagram and Twitter, VB Master Coaches, and all our previous shows are on YouTube by clicking into Master Coaches Weekly Buzz. Now, let's go to our host, John Foreman, and recently named head men's and women's coach at Medaille College in Buffalo, who will update us on his upcoming coaching conversations and his journey to Buffalo.
Oh, geez. Thanks, Ruth. Journey to Buffalo is complete. Started working today. So for those of you who are watching later, this is Wednesday, July 8th. Unfortunately, I'm in quarantine for a few days because that's what New York makes you do when you come from South Carolina, one of the COVID hot zones. But now that I'm up here, I'm looking forward to getting the coaching conversations go again. So make sure you're checking out my Twitter @CoachingVB, my blog, coachingvb.com, or you're watching on the Facebook page, Coaching Volleyball. So I look forward to seeing you either at a coaching conversation or next week on The Buzz. I hope everybody has a good week till then.